I've been a truck driver for over 15 years and honestly, I've seen it all on the road. Accidents, fights, people freaking out because of tiredness. But there's one thing that happened to me in March of last year that still keeps me up at night. I was going from El Paso to Phoenix, doing the same stretch I've been doing for years, along I-10. It was a quiet morning, the kind of trip where the radio was low and the engine roared as the soundtrack. But something about that night was different. The air felt thicker, like there was an electricity hanging around, you know? I had the dashboard clock on, my wristwatch on, and my cell phone on the stand. I usually check all three of them all the time, out of habit. I've always been a bit obsessed with time and schedules. Around 3 in the morning, I started to feel strange. Not tired, but uncomfortable. It was as if someone was watching me from inside the cab, even though it was completely empty. I even looked in the rearview mirror 3 times in a row, but I didn't see anything. The feeling persisted. It was then that I noticed the dashboard clock had stopped. It read exactly 3:33. I thought it was just an electrical fault. Then I looked at my wrist. Same time, 3:33. And my phone? Also frozen at 3:33. That gave me the creeps instantly. 3 clocks, 3 freezes in the same minute? That's not normal. I tried to restart my phone, but nothing. The screen froze at that moment as if it were a screenshot, but it wasn't. And the weirdest thing, the GPS stopped responding too. The map was open, but frozen. I could see the highway on the screen, but my blue dot simply wouldn't move, even with the truck moving. That's when it started to sink in that this wasn't just a technical problem. I kept driving, trying to stay calm, but I started to feel an absurd pressure in my chest. As if the air was getting heavier with every kilometer. And everything became quieter, even with the engine running. You know that feeling you get when you enter a padded room or inside a car on a day of heavy fog? It was like that, but on the road, with everything open. No cars coming or going. That's when I saw, up ahead, what looked like a shadow on the shoulder. Large, motionless. The light from the headlights hit it, but didn't reveal anything clearly. It was as if the light was passing through it. I didn't have the courage to stop. I just slowed down and tried to figure out what it was. When I passed her, or him, I don't know, I felt a cutting cold inside the cabin, as if I had passed through an ice tunnel. I instinctively looked in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there anymore. No shadow, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. I looked back at the dashboard and it was still stuck at 3:33. I can't say how much time has passed since it started. It could have been 5 minutes or half an hour. The road felt the same, as if I was driving in a circle. The strangest thing was when I started hearing a noise that sounded like a buzzing sound. It was low at first, almost imperceptible, but it slowly got louder, like a distant engine or a turbine turning. The sound was coming from behind me, but when I looked in the mirrors, all I could see was the empty road. I even opened the window to try to hear better, and the noise simply stopped. The silence returned, even heavier. That's when a vague memory came to me, of a conversation with another truck driver at a gas station in Tucson. He was talking about a serious accident that had happened in that area a few years ago, involving a truck and 2 cars. Everything went up in flames. 4 people died. Do you know what time? 3:33 in the morning. At that moment, my entire body shivered. The stretch I was driving through was the same. I started to shake, not from fear, but from an internal cold, as if something had entered me. The cabin got darker, even with the headlights on and the dashboard lit up. It was as if the darkness outside had infiltrated me. I felt a pressure in my head, a kind of internal buzzing, like when you enter a mountain tunnel. And then, for a second, I swear I saw a figure inside the cabin, out of the corner of my eye. A dark reflection, behind the passenger seat. I turned around, but there was nothing. Nothing visible, at least. I tried to turn on the radio to break the silence, but all I got was static. I turned the knobs, changed the frequency, turned it off and on again. Nothing. The noise of the truck also seemed different. As if the engine were heavier, dragging. By this point, my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my neck. I just focused on moving forward, trying to find an exit or a lighted shoulder, but the road seemed to have no end. The same posts, the same signs, as if everything had been duplicated. A loop. And always with the damn 3:33 frozen in the shadows on every clock. I don't know how to explain exactly what happened next, but at a certain point, it was as if I had woken up from a trance. Suddenly the GPS moved again. The blue dot started moving and the time changed to 3:47. The dashboard clock also unlocked, and the wrist clock synchronized with it. Everything seemed to be back to normal, but nothing inside me was normal. I was in a cold sweat, my mouth was dry and I had a horrible feeling that something had followed me. There was no longer the shadow, nor the buzzing, nor the figure, but it was as if it was still there, just quiet, waiting. I arrived at a gas station about 30 minutes later. As soon as I parked, I got out of the truck and sat on the curb, trying to breathe. The attendant came over to talk to me and asked if I was okay. He said I was pale and shaking a little. I made up an excuse about low blood pressure and went in to get a coffee, but the truth is I couldn't even drink it. My hand was shaking so much that I dropped the cup. No one there seemed to know anything, or at least they pretended to. But an older attendant, when she heard me asking about accidents on the highway, just nodded and went back to the counter without saying a word. That same night, still in the parking lot, I looked up the accident on my phone. I found an article from 2017. An out-of-control truck, a head-on collision with 2 cars, and an explosion. 3 adults and a child died instantly. And the time was exactly as I remembered, 3:33 in the morning. The strangest thing? It was the same model of truck I drive. Same make, same color. The article even had a photo of the scene, and it looked exactly like the stretch where it all started. Same bushes, same slight curve to the right, same continuous double lane. Since that day, I can no longer do that stretch during the early morning hours. I change the schedules, I change the time, I make excuses. I never saw anything again, but I was never the same again either. Every time I look at the clock and see 3:33, my chest tightens. A feeling that it wasn't over, it just paused. As if he was waiting for me to come back there, as if he had left something pending on that road. And as much as I try to forget, I know it wasn't all in my head. Because since that night, the truck's radio has never worked properly again. Just static. Especially when it's 3:33 in the morning. This story happened to me on a winter night in 2019, when I was driving across the state of Oregon, returning from a delivery in Portland. The forecast was already warning of a storm, but since the client was in a hurry, there was no way to delay. I had already driven through many roads in bad weather, but that night was different. The rain was falling so hard that it felt like it was going to puncture the windshield. The road was dark, with almost no cars, just me and the sound of the drops hitting the truck's bodywork. I remember well that it was around 11 o'clock when I saw someone on the shoulder trying to signal with their hand. It was a man, I could tell by the outline, standing in the rain, huddled in a dark coat that looked soaked through. I had that moment of doubt, because it's not common for someone to hitchhike in the middle of a storm, especially on a part of the road where there was nothing nearby. But at the same time, the guy looked like he was in trouble. I slowed down and stopped a few meters ahead. He ran to the passenger door, opened it without saying anything and quickly got in, just nodding in thanks. He didn't say his name or where he was going. He just sat back on the bench and stared straight ahead, his coat dripping onto the floor. I tried to make conversation, almost automatically, asking if everything was okay, but he just made a gesture with his hand, like, it's okay. He never took off his hood, and his face was half in shadow. The truck's interior light was off, so I couldn't see him properly. I only noticed that he was very pale, and that the way he was breathing seemed forced, as if he was recovering from something. I kept driving, thinking it was strange, but not wanting to be rude. The silence became heavy, and I had the feeling that time inside the cabin had slowed down. The road seemed to be moving at a standstill. After a few minutes, I looked to the side to ask where he wanted to get off. But the seat was empty. Out of nowhere. No noise, no movement. The guy was simply not there anymore. My heart started racing. I slammed on the brakes and almost stopped in the middle of the road. I looked around, turned around in the seat, looked in the back of the cabin, and even opened the door, thinking he might have jumped out, even though it made no sense at all. And all that was there was his coat, completely wet, thrown on the seat, dripping water as if it had still been worn seconds before. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the coat. It was an old model, heavy, kind of worn, like one of those military coats. The collar was soaked and the seat was still sunken, as if he had just gotten up. But there was no sign of the door opening, no noise, nothing. The truck was closed, and I would have certainly heard any movement. The rain continued to beat heavily on the windshield, and outside I could see nothing but water and darkness. The whole road seemed dead. I started to feel a strange cold inside the cabin, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. I carefully picked up the coat, not knowing what to do, and shivered all over. The inside was freezing cold, almost as if it had come out of a freezer. I put it in the back seat and stood there, with the truck on the shoulder of the road, trying to understand what had just happened. I thought I had hallucinated, but the coat was real. The water running down the floor was real. And the feeling that something was still there with me was real too. I tried to turn on the radio to break the silence, but it only made noise. I couldn't pick up any stations, which was strange, because normally the signal works well in that area. I got back on the road trying to stay calm, but I started to feel a presence next to me, as if the seat was still occupied. My eyes kept drifting to the side, hoping to see someone there. And worse, the inside rearview mirror, the small one that points into the cabin, started to fog up slightly, as if there was breathing behind me. I wiped it and it fogged up again, only in that part. At that moment, I started to sweat coldly. My hand was shaking on the steering wheel, and everything inside me told me to stop again, get out of there, abandon the truck if necessary. But I kept going, because I couldn't think of anything else but leaving. Another 20 minutes later, when I finally saw a gas station, I pulled over. I jumped out of the truck and went straight to the bathroom. When I came back, the coat was still there, in the same place. But now dry. Completely dry, as if it had never caught a drop of rain. And the smell was different. Before, it had that smell of wet cloth, mold, you know. But now it seemed like something old that had been kept for years. A strong smell of old cabinet, wood, dust. I couldn't stop looking at him. It was like there was something in that coat that didn't want to come off. I decided to leave my coat there and continue my journey. I just wanted to get home and forget about it. But the road wouldn't let us. With every curve, with every bolt of lightning that cut through the sky, I felt that that passenger was still nearby. Not in the bank, not physically. But as if a part of him had stuck to me, or to the truck. I started hearing little pops in the cab, sounds of fabric moving, as if someone was adjusting their clothes. At times, the rearview mirror would show a quick figure behind my shoulder, which would disappear as soon as I turned my face away. But I didn't stop anymore. I wasn't going to give that a chance to happen again. I got home in the morning, tired and mentally destroyed. I left the truck in the trucking company's yard and went straight to bed. When I went back to pick up the truck 2 days later, the coat was gone. I asked the cleaning staff if they had seen anything, and no one knew anything. There was no sign of it being removed. It wasn't in the trash or on the back seat. It was as if it had evaporated, just like the guy. The only thing left was a slight water stain on the seat, in the shape of his body sitting there. A clear, visible mark that no one could clean. I told this story to a few friends from the road. Most of them laughed, thinking I was tired, that I had mixed things up. But there was one guy, an old road guy, who didn't laugh. He just asked if the coat was dark green, kind of military. When I confirmed, he was quiet for a few seconds and said he had heard similar stories in that region. People who would give a ride to a man in a coat during storms and then he would disappear. Always the same way. Always leaving something behind, a coat, a cap, a pair of gloves. And then that would disappear too. There was never any proof, they never knew who he was. They just knew that he always came back. Since then, every time it starts to rain heavily on the road, I've been on high alert. Especially when I see someone on the shoulder of the road. I've been in similar situations 3 times, but I've never stopped. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. But I know he wasn't like you or me. And sometimes, when it's raining and the windows start to fog up, I can still smell that coat. And I know, deep down, that he's still out there. Waiting for another storm. Waiting for another ride. This happened in late 2020, on a delivery I made to a used furniture company in a small town in rural Kansas. The customer had purchased a load of used cabinets and tables, and I was assigned to take everything from the warehouse in Omaha to there. The trip was uneventful, the weather was good, the roads were empty. I arrived at my destination, a half-ruined warehouse on the outskirts of town, around 9 a.m. and unloaded everything myself, as usual. But it was when I was doing the final inspection of the bodywork that I noticed a suitcase in the corner. An old suitcase, made of dark leather, very worn, with the handles fraying. At the time, I thought it was from the customer and asked the guy responsible for delivery. He looked at it, made a strange face and said that it wasn't part of the order. I called the warehouse in Omaha thinking someone might have put it there by mistake, but no one recognized it. No one even knew what I was talking about. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't the kind of bag you'd forget about easily, it was big, heavy, and you could tell there was something inside. Since it had no name, label, nothing, I thought I would take it with me and try to sort it out later. But I admit that something about that bag made me uncomfortable from the start. I put the suitcase in the cabin and continued on my way back. During the trip, every time I looked in the rearview mirror and saw it there in the back seat, I felt uncomfortable. As if there was someone else in there. I can't explain it, but it was as if there was a presence in the truck, quiet, watching. And it didn't help that the suitcase seemed darker than before. It may have just been my imagination, or the angle of the light, but it seemed like it was getting more opaque, as if it was sucking in the light around it. And even though the engine was making a lot of noise, at times I had the feeling that the cabin was too quiet. When I stopped at a gas station to eat, I decided to open my suitcase. It didn't have a lock, just an old buckle. Inside, I found several old photos, the kind in black and white, on thick paper, with the edges half-eaten by time. They were photos of people. Some alone, others in groups. But they all had something in common, they were looking straight at the camera. And, somehow, straight at me. Their faces were strange. Some very serious, others with expressions that I couldn't decipher. And the more I looked, the more it seemed like those people's eyes were fixed on me, even when I changed the position of the photo. I put the photos back in the suitcase, closed it, and placed it on the floor of the cabin, right behind the passenger seat. I didn't say anything to anyone that day, but the feeling of being watched increased a lot after I opened that suitcase. The rearview mirror gave me strange reflections, as if someone was sitting behind me and disappeared when I looked straight at them. The air became more charged. I'm not talking about heat or cold, but a feeling of presence, as if the space inside the truck had become smaller. As if I was sharing it with someone who didn't want to be noticed at first. That night, I stopped to sleep at a rest area near Topeka. I always keep the curtains closed and lock everything, but that night I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating, with the distinct impression that someone was inside the truck. I lay still, listening. The sound of the engine turned off, the wind blowing outside, and footsteps. Inside. Slow, short footsteps on the floor of the cabin. I thought I might be dreaming, but when I looked at the passenger seat, I saw the trunk open. I swear I had closed it before going to sleep. And the worst part, some photos were scattered on the floor, as if someone had messed with them. I jumped up, turned on the cabin light and looked everywhere. Under the seats, behind the dashboard, even inside the interior cargo compartments. There was no one, obviously. But the photos on the floor left me paralyzed. There was one that I was sure wasn't there before. It showed a man sitting exactly where I was. Same seat, same position, as if it had been taken from inside the truck. But the man's face was very similar to mine. The clothes were different, older, but the shape of the face, the look, it was like looking at myself in a time I didn't live in. I got back behind the wheel with the photos in my hands, trying to understand what was happening. I took out my cell phone to take a picture of the photo. I wanted to send it to someone, ask for their opinion, but the camera didn't work. The screen went black every time I pointed it at the paper. And when I tried to take a picture of just the inside of the cabin, the cell phone froze. It was as if that suitcase didn't want to be registered. From then on, everything started to go wrong. The truck's interior lights started to fail, the cell phone battery dropped from 70% to 0 in less than 5 minutes, and the temperature inside the cabin plummeted. The kind of cold that doesn't come from outside, but comes from inside your skin. I grabbed the suitcase with both hands, wanting to throw it away right there. But when I went to pick it up, it was heavier. Much heavier. As if it had been filled with rocks. I had to use my whole body to drag it to the door. And even then, I almost dropped it. I carried it to a large trash container in the corner of the rest area and threw it in with force. The sound it made didn't sound like leather hitting metal, but something hollower, denser. I stood there for a few seconds, staring, waiting for something to happen. But nothing. I got back in the truck, still shaking, and drove straight until dawn, without stopping again. The next day, out of pure curiosity, or stupidity, I went back to the gas station where I had left my suitcase. I wanted to see if it was still there. The container was empty. No sign of the suitcase, the photos, or anything. I asked the attendant there, and he said that the garbage truck hadn't come by that night. Or that morning. In other words, if it had disappeared, it hadn't been taken officially. Could it have been someone? Maybe. But what bothers me is the way everything seemed to have been erased, as if that suitcase had never existed. Only I saw it, only I touched it, only I felt its weight. Since that day, I have avoided carrying anything that is not on the official delivery list. And I keep an eye out for any strange objects in the body of the truck. It was not a dream, nor was it my imagination. Because, a few days later, I found one of the photos inside my backpack, even though I had left them all with my suitcase. It was one of the first I had seen, a woman with a neutral expression looking straight ahead. But now, looking closer, there was a new detail. Behind her, blurry, there was something that looked like the inside of my cabin. As if that photo had changed, or as if it had always shown that and I had not noticed before. I still keep this photo in a box in the closet at home. I don't know why. Maybe out of fear of what might happen if I throw it away. Nothing like that has come up again, but every time I go driving I review everything. I open the body, check every corner. I don't want to carry anything I shouldn't. Because that time, I didn't just take one suitcase. I took someone. And that feeling of being watched, it never completely left me. There was something that happened to me in 2022 that I still avoid talking about. It's not easy to explain without sounding crazy. But I know what I experienced. I was driving from Amarillo, Texas, to Santa Fe, carrying a shipment of auto parts. It was a stretch of road that I knew well, flat, long, with almost nothing in between. I got on the road around 6 in the morning. The weather was overcast, the sky was a bit greenish, and it looked like a storm was about to hit, but nothing more. It was around 9:12 a.m., I remember that time well, that I saw something cross the road in front of me. It was fast and low, like an animal, but it didn't look like any animal I knew. It had thin legs, its body seemed too elongated, and its movement was strange, almost mechanical. I didn't have time to brake. The impact was abrupt, and the truck gave a jolt that almost knocked me off my seat. I pulled over to the side of the road and got out to see what was wrong. But there was nothing. No marks on the bumper, no blood on the asphalt. Just that strange, heavy silence in the air. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand what had happened. And then I got back into the truck, a little disconcerted. That's when I realized that the radio, the clock on the dashboard and even the cell phone had reset to the same time, 6:03 in the morning. I thought it was a bug, some kind of electrical failure, I don't know. Except everything around me seemed to have come back as well. The sun was at the same point as when I left Amarillo. The same cars passing me, the same smell of coffee from the thermal cup. It was like I had gone back to the beginning of the day. And as soon as that sunk in, I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to ignore it, to carry on as if nothing had happened. But when I got to the point where I had run over that animal, it appeared again. Same scene. Same time. Same impact. And again, nothing on the ground. No sign of what I had hit. Just that strange, dense air and a feeling that something was out of place. I walked back to the truck, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, I swear I saw my own face for a second, but it wasn't moving like I was. It was staring at me. I turned around on impulse, but there was no one there. On the third repetition, I began to notice details changing. Little things. The smell in the cabin was different, stronger, like cooked meat. The sky was slightly darker. And the eyes of that animal, if that's what it was, looked human for a second. Each time I woke up at the same time, at the same point on the road. But it was as if the world was slowly becoming distorted. The fourth time, I saw a figure on the shoulder of the road, with its back to the road. It was motionless, with its hands at its sides, as if waiting for me to pass. I looked away, blinked, and when I looked again, it had disappeared. And when I got to the spot where the accident had happened, this time there was nothing crossing the road. But the truck jerked just the same. I knew I had hit something, but now it was invisible. It got worse every time the day started over. By the sixth iteration, the cabin no longer felt the same. There were marks on the windows, like scratches coming from inside. The radio would turn on by itself, but it wouldn't play music, only whispered voices, as if someone was trying to say something in another language. I recorded one of these voices on my phone, just to try to prove it later, but the audio would disappear by itself. At this point, I was on the verge of a breakdown. I couldn't break out of that cycle, and each new version of the same day came out more distorted, dirtier, darker. And the smell, that rotten smell, grew stronger, to the point where I almost threw up while driving. By the 8th time, the people I saw in the cars next to me looked wrong. Like they were wearing masks with human faces. Stiff movements, glassy eyes, unblinking. A driver passed me and turned his face for a split second, and I saw that he had no eyes. Just black, deep holes. That's when I started trying to get off the road. I tried to swerve, take detours, alternate roads, go off the beaten track. But always, somehow, I ended up back on the same stretch. Always. With the clock showing 6:03. I was stuck there. Like I had broken some rule by running over that thing. On the 10th repetition, the creature didn't cross the road. It was standing in the middle of the road, facing me. And I slammed on the brakes. But the truck didn't respond. The steering wheel locked, and I felt like it wanted me to crash again. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was that face looking straight at me. This time, clearly. It wasn't an animal. It was something between a man and a beast. The eyes were sunken, the skin was pulled tight, and the mouth was sewn shut. I woke up in silence, still at the wheel, with the truck stopped. The clock read 6:04. For the first time, a minute had passed. The sky was still dark, like before dawn, but now it was pitch black, with no sign of light on the horizon. The road seemed abandoned. No cars were passing by, no sound. The radio was muted, the cell phone screen was off, and the dashboard was blinking slowly, as if it were failing. I got out of the truck, trying to understand if I had finally broken out of the cycle or if this was just another layer deeper. The air smelled of burning and metal, and when I looked back, I saw tire tracks on the asphalt, but they weren't mine. There were 4 parallel grooves, as if something very heavy had been dragged. I walked a few meters down the road until I realized that the scenery around me no longer looked the same. The trees were all twisted, as if they had grown in pain. The asphalt was cracked, and the landscape looked like a poorly made copy of the previous one, as if someone had tried to replicate the real world and gotten the details wrong. When I got back to the truck, the passenger door was open. I was sure I had left everything locked. And on the seat, there was a small, black, sphere-shaped object. When I touched it, a wave of heat went up my arm, and I heard, inside my head, the phrase, "Now you see." Since then, I have never had that same day again. But something has changed. Electronic clocks don't work around me. They always stop at 6:03. Cameras sometimes take blurry pictures when I show up. And there are days when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm sure I'm back on that road, even though I'm lying down at home. I feel the truck lurch, the smell of rotting meat, and I see for an instant that creature standing in the middle of the road, just waiting for me. As if it had let me out, but not completely. As if I still belonged to that space between days. No one believes me when I tell them. And I understand. Because if I had heard this story from another truck driver, would also think he was tired or crazy. But I know what I saw. I know what I lived through. And every time I look at the clock and see 6:03, I feel that shiver down my spine. The feeling that, at any moment, it could all start over again. And I go back to that road, that same morning, to do it all over again, maybe without being able to get off the next day. This happened to me on a night I'll never forget, driving back from a delivery in Nevada to a company in Flagstaff, Arizona. It was a long, lonely stretch, and since I was early, I decided to take a side road through the mountains to save time. There was no moon that night, and the sky was completely dark. No stars, no sounds, just the roar of the truck and the darkness all around. Around 2 in the morning, something caught my attention, small lights flickering on the side of the road. At first I thought they were some animal's eyes reflecting, or maybe headlights in the distance, but as I got closer I realized they were candles. Lots of candles. Lit, all lined up, one next to the other, forming a path. It wasn't just on the side of the road, some were in the middle of the bush, but they followed a perfect pattern, like a drawn line. I slowed down and looked out of the corner of my eye, hoping to see someone, a stopped car, anything that would explain it. But there was no one. Nothing but the dark road and that trail of tiny fire that seemed to want to take me somewhere. On a stupid impulse, or perhaps out of pure morbid curiosity, I pulled over to the side of the road, grabbed a flashlight, and got out. The silence was so absolute that I could hear the crackle of the flames burning the wick. I followed the candles, trying to understand what they were. Each candle was inside a clean glass cup, as if someone had placed it there carefully. The further I walked, the stronger the feeling that this was for me. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt like I was being watched. As if someone had prepared everything waiting for me to stop there. After about 200 meters down the road, I saw what looked like a clearing. And in the middle of it, an altar. It wasn't improvised, it was something elaborate. Made of stacked stones, covered with a dark cloth. On top, several offerings, fruit, a glass with some liquid, and around it, more candles. But what stopped me were the photos. About 5 or 6 framed photos, all of me. But photos that I never took. In some, I was sleeping inside the truck's cab. In others, I was driving, or stopped at a gas station I usually go to. And in all of them, there was one detail in common, in the background, a shadow. A figure behind me. I stood there for a good few minutes, not knowing whether to take a closer look or run back. But curiosity got the better of me. I approached the altar carefully, trying to understand what was happening. The photos were fresh, as if they had been printed that day. No signs of wear, no dust, nothing. And that figure was the same in all of them. Sometimes only a part would appear, a shoulder, a silhouette in the glass, a reflection on some surface. But in all of them, it was there. That gave me such a chill that my knees felt weak. I felt exposed, as if someone had been following me for a long time without me realizing it. I had the idea of taking a picture with my cell phone to show someone later. When I pointed the camera at the altar, the screen went black. Completely. As if the device had turned off, but the light from the flashlight continued to work normally. I pointed at photos, at fruit, at everything, but the cell phone didn't capture anything. It was as if that place couldn't be recorded. Suddenly, the smell changed. A smell of wet earth, mixed with something denser, metallic. And the sound, which until then had only been the crackling of the candles, became muffled, as if I had entered a bubble. The outside world no longer reached me. At that moment, I felt I had to get out of there. I turned my back on the altar and hurried back along the path of candles. But now, it seemed like they were farther apart from each other, as if the path had lengthened. The forest around me seemed denser too, with branches moving even without wind. I heard footsteps behind me, light but steady. I didn't run, because my body froze. I kept walking, trying to appear calm, but sweat was running down my back. When I finally reached the truck, the candles near it were all out. And the truck's headlight, which I had left on, was also out. I got into the truck with a shaking hand, turned on the ignition, and luckily it started right away. But the radio, which always came on with it, was silent. No noise, no static. Just silence. I started driving slowly, still glancing in the rearview mirror every 5 seconds. I thought I saw something sitting in the back seat for a second, but when I turned my head, there was nothing. Just the dark cloth covering my backpack, but at that moment, it looked like a silhouette. I could only breathe again when I saw the lights of the main road. I went back to the original route without looking back. I didn't stop, I didn't rest, I just drove away. In the days that followed, I tried to understand what had happened. I went back to the place with 2 colleagues from the transport company, but we found nothing. No candles, no altar, no clearing. Just the road, the bushes, and a silence too heavy to be just a coincidence. They laughed, saying I must have been tired, hallucinating. But there was a time, while we were walking along the stretch that I remembered well, that one of the guys stopped and pointed to an empty glass cup on the ground. Clean, dust-free, stuck between some rocks. He didn't say anything, just looked at me and shrugged. But I could see on his face that he also felt something strange there. At night, I dreamed about the altar. But this time, there were people around. Several faces that I didn't recognize, all with candles in their hands, forming a circle. In the middle, me. Sitting. Motionless. With my eyes open, but not moving. As if I were just a body, just a presence. And behind me, the figure. The same one that appeared in the photos. He didn't move, just stared at me. I woke up sweating, panting, and had the urge to check my phone. There was a new photo in the gallery. One that I hadn't taken. It showed the dashboard of my truck, taken from inside the cabin, with the figure reflected in the glass. Since then, every time I pass through dark roads, I keep an eye out for any strange little lights. I no longer stop to check anything. I learned not to listen to curiosity. The photo disappeared after a few days. Or maybe I deleted it without remembering. But the feeling remained. That certainty that, somewhere, someone or something is still watching me. Waiting for the right moment to light the candles again. Preparing a new altar. With new photos. With new offerings. And maybe next time I won't be able to get out.